The number one question I get every single day is this: when does XRP actually reach 4 digits? When does the math that everyone keeps quoting on Twitter, on YouTube, in every Telegram group, when does it stop being a meme and start being a price? And here is what I'm about to tell you that is not being explained to retail investors the way it should be. The most important thing Jake Claver said about $1,000 XRP was not the number. It was the silence after the number. He gave the math. He refused to give the date. And while everyone in this space rushed to fill that silence with their own predictions, with their own calendars, with their own 2027 fantasies, they missed the actual signal. Because a price target without a timeline is not a guess. It is a structural threshold. It is a checklist. And there are exactly 3 items on that checklist. Only one of them has even started.
Exhales. Let me pull back the curtain on what the rest of this space refuses to read out loud. Make sure to like and subscribe and drop a comment below with your opinion on XRP, and watch until the end, because the final minutes reveal why July 13th could change everything. Welcome back. I am the Calm Analyst. Today we decode the architecture behind the $1,000 conversation, and we do it the way it should be done, with data, with sequence, with composure. Before we go under the surface, nothing in this video is financial advice. This is one read of the public record, the regulatory pipeline, and the institutional positioning curve. Your decisions belong to you, your timeline, and a qualified professional. What I offer is the structural read. What you do with it is yours. Let's jump in. Let's start with the hard truth. 95% of this space is staring at the wrong variable. They are staring at the price. They are staring at the candle. They are watching the 4-hour chart and asking why nothing is moving. And if you are wondering why the structure feels frozen while the headlines feel loud, you need to understand something the institutional desks understand, and the retail crowd does not. Price is the output. The conditions are the input. And until the conditions move, the output cannot move. Here is what Jake Claver actually did in that interview. He was asked about 30,000 XRP. He answered with 2 numbers: $30 million, ultra-high net worth status, a category that holds roughly 0.00001% of the global population. Then he added the condition, $1,000 per token. And then he stopped. He did not say when. He did not say how. He did not give a quarter, a year, or a cycle. He gave the math and he walked away from the calendar. Most commentators in this space would have filled that silence. They would have drawn a chart. They would have said 2027. They would have said 2030. Claver said none of it. And the silence is the part the coverage misunderstood. Because here is the difference. And this is the part that retail investors are not being shown. A price target with a timeline is a prediction. A price target without a timeline is a structural threshold. The first is testable against a calendar. The second is testable against conditions. Calendars break creators. Conditions don't. Claver was not refusing to commit. He was refusing to lie. The honest answer to when does XRP reach $1,000 is when 3 specific things happen and not before. Let me lay those 3 things out now because they are the entire story. The first condition is the Clarity Act. The market structure bill currently moving through the Senate is the regulatory key. Right now, XRP retains its legal standing from the Torres ruling and the Second Circuit affirmation. That is judicial clarity. What the largest institutional allocators on the planet are waiting for is legislative clarity. Judges can be appealed. Statutes are harder to unwind. Until the Clarity Act reaches the president's desk, BlackRock, Fidelity, Franklin Templeton, the trillion-dollar custodians, they are positioned in size, but not at full size. That gap between positioned and full position, that is checkpoint 1. The second condition is real-world asset tokenization reaching operational scale. Sandy Call of Franklin Templeton said it plainly on camera. The institutions are not trying to recreate the financial system. They are trying to redesign it. Recreation means new infrastructure for the same products. Redesign means new products on new infrastructure. The XRP ledger sits on the short list of chains being tested for that tokenization layer. Until those tests move from pilot programs to live operational volume, the demand pressure that drives a 4-digit price has not arrived. It is being built. It is not yet flowing. The third condition is bank deployment beyond testing. This is the single most overlooked data point in the entire space. Banks have been testing Ripple's settlement infrastructure on private ledgers for months. Testing is not deployment. Deployment is when the bank moves a customer transaction across that infrastructure for the first time and books the result on its balance sheet. The day that happens at customer scale, not pilot, not internal demo, but live volume. That is the day the demand curve for XRP changes shape entirely. 3 conditions. 1 has barely started. The other 2 are in motion, but not complete. That is what Jake Claver knew when he refused to give a date. Now let's do the math. Because here is what the retail crowd ignores when they hear $1,000 XRP and immediately roll their eyes. 30,000 tokens multiplied by $1,000 equals 30 million. That math is not controversial. What is controversial is whether the price arrives there. So let's read the supply side, because that is where the conversation actually lives. Total supply is fixed at 100 billion. Circulating is roughly 57 billion. But here is what almost no one is showing you. Circulating is not the same as float. The float, the actual XRP available for an institutional buyer to acquire without moving the market, is a fraction of circulating. XRP locked in escrow is not float. XRP held in cold storage by holders since 2017 and 2018 is not float. XRP committed to liquidity corridors by Ripple's institutional partners is not float. When you strip out the immobilized supply, the actual liquid order book that an allocator has to source from is a small number. A genuinely small number. Now layer the demand side on top of that. The Coinbase and Parthenon Institutional Survey released this year polled 351 institutional investors. 18% already hold XRP. 25% more plan to add it within the next 12 months. Combined, that is 43%. These are not retail wallets. These are institutional balance sheets. And the survey was conducted before the Clarity Act vote, before tokenization moved to scale, before any bank deployment at customer volume. Think about what that means for 1 second. 43% of polled institutions are positioning before the catalysts arrive. That is the inverse of retail behavior. Retail buys after the news. Institutions buy before. Now let's think about this logically. If the institutional positioning curve is bending earlier than the price curve, and the float is compressing while the demand pipeline is expanding, the question is not whether the price re-rates. The question is, what condition triggers the re-rating? And that brings us back to the checklist. Here's the math the retail crowd ignores. Even if XRP captures a small fraction of the cross-border payments market, which moves roughly $150 trillion annually, even if it captures a fraction of the $4 trillion tokenization wave, the demand pressure on a compressed float forces a price re-rating. This isn't a prediction. It is a mechanical consequence of supply and demand operating on a fixed cap asset. Greg Kidd, the 10th employee at Ripple, was asked about price. He gave 2 words: liquidity and supply. Not multipliers, not targets. Liquidity and supply. Because when demand exceeds available float, the price rises. That is not opinion. That is mechanics. If you have a problem with these numbers, you don't have a problem with me. You have a problem with the arithmetic of a fixed cap asset meeting an institutional positioning curve. While retail investors are panic selling because the chart is red and the headlines are loud, the institutional signal has never been clearer. Look at the evidence. The Coinbase Parthenon survey, 351 institutions, 43% positioned or positioning. Look at Franklin Templeton, with Sandy Call on the record about the redesign of the financial system, not the recreation of it. Look at the spot ETF approvals that have already cleared the regulatory pipeline. Look at Ripple's acquisitions, the prime brokerage, the treasury infrastructure, every single move calibrated to plug into institutional plumbing, not retail speculation. Look at the OCC charter applications. Look at the bank pilots that have moved from internal demos into scheduled production windows. Ask yourself this brutal question. Does a trillion-dollar firm like BlackRock or Franklin Templeton position in size without absolute legal certainty? Absolutely not. They don't gamble. They position. They sign NDAs. They build infrastructure. They allocate before the catalyst, not after. This isn't retail FOMO. This is calculated positioning by custodians and market makers who already know what the next 12 to 24 months of regulatory and operational rollout looks like. They are not reading the price chart. They are reading the legislative calendar. They are reading the tokenization deployment schedule. They are reading the bank settlement pilots. And they are positioned accordingly. Here is the contrast that matters. Retail is staring at a 4-hour chart and asking why XRP isn't moving. Institutions are staring at a sequence of 3 checkpoints and asking how much float is left before the first one engages. One group is watching candles. The other group is watching architecture. Only one of those groups is going to be holding the position when the re-rating happens. Now here is what most analysts miss when they list the 3 conditions in isolation. The conditions are not parallel. They are sequential. They are a chain reaction. The Clarity Act unlocks the regulatory clarity that allows the largest tokenization deployments to move from pilot to production. Production tokenization gives banks the operational confidence to move customer volume onto the XRP ledger, instead of testing it on internal ledgers. Each condition opens the door for the next. That means the timeline is not 3 independent events. It is one chain reaction waiting for the first link to engage, and that is why the calendar is unknowable. You cannot date a chain reaction. You can only describe its conditions and watch for the first link. But the first link is closer than the headlines suggest. The Clarity Act is in active markup. The tokenization pilots are publicly disclosed. The bank settlement schedules are being filed. None of these things existed in operational form 3 years ago. 3 years ago, the asset was in court. 3 years ago, the question was survival. Today, the question is sequencing. That is the difference between the silence of the lawsuit and the silence of the construction phase. The silence sounds the same. The structure underneath is completely different. When the first link engages, when the Clarity Act reaches the president's desk, the wait-and-see capital becomes all-in capital. The risk premium that institutional allocators are pricing into their models vanishes. And once that premium vanishes, the gap between current price and structural fair value closes faster than the order book can absorb. We are moving from an era of abundance to an era of scarcity, and almost no one in retail has noticed yet. Think about the float compression in real terms. Every XRP that moves into a multi-sig institutional vault, into a custodied tokenization corridor, into a bank's settlement reserve, that token does not come back to the open market for a 10% profit. It is gone. It is locked into utility infrastructure that is designed to hold it indefinitely. The float is shrinking quietly while the demand pipeline is expanding loudly. Once the Clarity Act passes, the risk premium collapses. Once the risk premium collapses, the institutional allocations that are currently sized at 15 and 20% of intended position scale to 100%. And they scale into a float that has already been compressing for years. The institutions have spent years trying to shake retail out so they can take the position. Every piece of FUD, every red candle in a quiet news cycle, every XRP is dead headline. The function of those events is the same. To convert the exit liquidity of the confused into the entry liquidity of the informed. That is not a conspiracy. That is how every major asset re-rating in financial history has worked. When the final switch is flipped, when all three conditions clear, the retail window closes. You will not be watching the chart and deciding whether to enter. You will be watching the chart and realizing the entry already happened, at a price you no longer recognize. The door is closing fast, not because someone is closing it on you, but because the float is being absorbed by entities that do not sell. I know it is tough to watch the red candles. I know the headlines create fear. I know the silence between catalysts feels like the asset is broken. But as an analyst, I am trained to distinguish between noise and signal. The noise is the chart. The signal is the survey. The noise is the headline. The signal is the legislative markup. The noise is the influencer drawing a line on a 4-hour time frame. The signal is Jake Claver refusing to draw a line at all. You held through a court case. The court case ended in your favor. You held through the appeal. The appeal ended in your favor. You held through the silence between rulings when no one knew which way it would resolve. That silence ended. What you are holding through now is not silence. It is construction. The legislative framework is being drafted. The tokenization rails are being laid. The bank deployments are being scheduled. You are not waiting for permission anymore. You are waiting for completion. Being early feels exactly like being wrong, right up until the moment reality catches up. The question is not whether the price recovers. The question is who is still holding the position when the first link in the chain engages, and the entire sequence resolves into a re-rating that the retail timeline could not predict, because the retail timeline was watching the wrong variable. Make sure to like and subscribe and drop a comment below with your opinion on XRP. And watch until the end. Because the final minutes reveal why July 13th could change everything. The headline says $1,000 XRP. The structure says 3 checkpoints, 2 surveys, 1 refusal of a date, a chain reaction waiting for its first link, and a positioning curve that is bending earlier than the price. What Jake Claver said with his silence is more valuable than what he said with his numbers. He said, "The math is real, but the calendar is not yours to know. The patience is yours. The conviction is yours. The position is yours. The date belongs to the conditions. Price is a distraction. Structure is the reality." The question is, are you watching the noise or are you watching the checklist? If you made it to the end of this video, comment "checklist" below. I want to see who is actually reading the structure and not the chart. If you value this kind of deep dive, subscribe, because the next 12 months are going to separate the holders who understood the sequence from the ones who only understood the price. In a market fueled by emotion and noise, we thrive on data and composure. Stay patient. Stay rational. The math doesn't lie and the system is almost complete. I am the calm analyst. Stay sharp, stay positioned.